everybody. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tullahoma. We're glad you're all here. Glad of those in person who came out on this beautiful sunny day. Those who've joined us on Zoom and those who've joined us on YouTube. And let's see. Our opening reading is going to be 556. I had to, like I said, I had to cut down a rose bush. I lost a rose bush during the morning church. I don't know, I like this. So I will read, and y'all will read the italics. These roses under my window make no reference to former roses or to better ones. They are for what they are. They exist with God today.
There is no time to dim. There is simply a rose. It is perfect in every moment of its existence.
Before a leaf bud has burst, its whole life acts. In the full-blown flower there is no more. In the leafless root there is no less.
Its nature is satisfied, and it satisfies nature and all moments alike.
But we postpone or remember. We do not live in the present, but with reverted eye lament the past, or heedless of the riches that surround us, stand on tiptoe to foresee the future.
We cannot be happy or strong until we too live with nature in the present above time.
And so Buddhist very well.
We like the chalice now.
Yes. Now we like the chalice. Kawasaki. Reading. At times our own light goes out and it is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. And that's Albert Schweitzer. And announcements. Speaker next week is going to be Denise Gayush. She is an ordained Unitarian minister from Nashville, and she usually gives a wonderful talk. So, is she coming in person? Do we know?
Yes.
She is coming in person. She is a wonderful speaker, so we hope you.
She did her internship here while she was in seminary.
Yeah, correct. Mm-hmm. Let's see, we also have Zen group. It's a Zazen sitting meditation group. And if I'm wrong, let me know, Chuck. We do 25 minutes of sitting meditation, 5 minutes of walking meditation, and then we usually, Doug reads from a book. If you are interested in coming, you need to contact Doug and come a little early. And then that way he can go over everything that we do, so you're not kind of lost, because there's a lot of bowing and then there's some chanting, and it's easy. It just takes 5 minutes to learn it, but you kind of need to know what we're doing. Anything else I should add?
No, but a related announcement is immediately after Zen at 7:15 on Wednesday. We'll have our Wednesday night discussion group will be meeting out here. And so far, at this point, we're just watching TED Talks and of interest to the group and discussing them. If anybody wants to come and has any TED Talks they'd like to share or like to see, let us know. After this coming week, Annie and I are going to be on the road for several weeks, so we're probably, the Wednesday night group will be on hiatus for a few weeks. Keep you all posted.
Any announcements from Jim?
Yeah, thank you. Several. We have a board meeting scheduled for today, right after talkback. So after talkback, we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll have a board meeting. Our annual business meeting is scheduled for June 4th, which is 2 weeks from today. So we do need a quorum for that. So if you can, please come in person if you can, but if you can't, you can vote by proxy, and that counts toward reaching our quorum. So if you cannot attend in person, the proxy process is just send me an email that says, you're not gonna make it, so-and-so is my proxy. And then that helps us meet our quorum. After the board meeting today, I'll send out the official notice for the annual meeting, and that will be the agenda which, for the meeting, which mostly is approval of our budget for next year and the election of officers and board members. After that, during the annual meeting, we will have a congregational discussion, sort of talk about the future of the church. So that's coming up in 2 weeks, so please do your best to be there. And then, I think Katie in the back of the room is still looking for more help. So if you can help with that technical aspect, please get with her and she will train you, help you set up. And also, at the moment, we still have a vacancy on the board for the religious education coordinator. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know. So thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Jim. Any other, I know the P flag meets the second Monday.
6 p.m.
6 months. Say it again.
Second Monday, 6 p.m.
Okay, P flag. For those of you who do not know, P flag is Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays.
Plus.
Yes. Any other announcements? Okay. If you'd like to donate to the church, we do not take up a basket. We do have a shaker basket at the back of the church if you would like to donate, or you can also send a check to Tullahoma, P.O. Box 331, Tullahoma 37388. I believe Costa also has our pledge forms on the mail. I put one in the shaker box. I didn't know if you were going to be here today. So please, if you're a member of this church, get a pledge form, fill it out, and give it to Costa to let her know. That helps her plan the budget. It's hard to plan the budget if you don't know how much money you have to spend. Did you want to add anything else?
No, I did just want to thank those who have pledged already. And as Debbie mentioned, it does help with the budget planning process if we do know, the expected pledges we have coming in. Of course, if you choose not to pledge, we do have a budget where we anticipate unpledged funds that come in through the year, so those are also very welcome as well.
Can you pledge if you aren't a member?
Yes.
Like you've never
We'll
done.
take the money from anybody. Know any lobbyists? Okay. Now, I am so excited to introduce our speaker, Chuck. It's been a long time since I've heard you, so come on up.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Wow, there's more people I'm seeing here. Good to see y'all. I'm Chuck Morgret. Everybody probably knows that, but I noticed that somehow none of us are wearing our name tags. So get right into it because it's a little bit long. Several years ago, between starting in 2017 to 2019, I did a series of sermons on each of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism and what they meant to me. I had intended to wrap that up with a final sermon summarizing it all, but COVID intervened. 2019 seems like about a century ago, doesn't it? Finally, though, here's that summary. I kind of wish that I had written the summary first because it would have been easier to write this from scratch and to condense it down from 7 full-length talks. But I'm fully aware of the Article 2 Study Commission and that our principles might be on the verge of being replaced. The name of that commission refers to Article 2 of the UUA bylaws, which is our statement of principles and purposes. A couple of things about that. One, it's not quite a done deal. The proposed Article 2 replacement is not final, and it may well be heavily modified between now and General Assembly in June. and it won't become official until at least the next General Assembly in 2024. And two, as near as I can tell, the proposed replacement isn't inconsistent with or incompatible with our current principles. Largely, it's a restatement in different form. In any event, for at least another year, the principles as we've come to know them, and as they have stood since 1987, are still our principles. So I almost waited too long to do this talk, but not quite. I'm not here to offer my thoughts on the proposed replacement. I'll leave that for another day. I'd like to start by simply going over the principles which are listed in the front of the hymn. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. I have personally found our principles, taken as a whole, to constitute a remarkably complete, self-consistent, and interlocking moral code. These principles were agreed upon by our association, not handed down as absolute law by a prophet or a deity. Thus, they constitute a living tradition that we can add to or clarify or update as the need arises, or replace them with a totally new formulation as we may be on the verge of doing. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't have a creed, but we do have our principles, which are at the core of what it means to be a UU. They're what makes us a religious community instead of a Sunday morning social club. And while there's plenty of room for interpretation of their meaning, according to this congregation's bylaws, a member of the congregation is expected to be in sympathy with these principles. The principles are not a belief system. Rather, they're a framework around which to build our individual belief systems and a touchstone against which to test our beliefs. We're free to hold and act on a wide range of beliefs, but to the extent that our beliefs run counter to the principles, we're not being authentic UUs. I think that when we recite our principles, we do it by rote to some degree. That is, we say the words, but we don't necessarily stop to think about what they mean in any real detail. So what I'm going to do today is dissect the wording of each principle in the hope that y'all will perhaps take some time to think more deeply about them than you otherwise would. First, though, let's start with what it means to covenant, to affirm, and promote. A covenant is simply a formal mutual promise or agreement. There's nothing much more to say about that. The closing line of the Declaration of Independence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, made it a covenant between its 56 signers. To affirm a principle means to assert its truth or validity. To promote it means to encourage it to flourish. So to affirm and promote it means that we not only believe it to be true, but we intend to support and act on that belief. This means that the principles are not a list of rights and obligations bestowed upon us by God or by the UUA, but rather a promise we make to each other to support these principles amongst ourselves and to promote them in the larger society. So on to our first principle. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Let's jump ahead to every person for a moment. I don't intend to argue for or against the expansion of every person to include species other than humans. That's a whole different subject. For today, just to limit the scope, I'm limiting the discussion to human beings. To say that worth and dignity are inherent is to say that they are part and parcel of personhood. We're not talking about economic worth here. We're not defining the worth of a person in terms of their material contributions to society, or even their potential to someday make such contributions, or acknowledgement of past contributions. We are asserting that each and every person is valuable and adds something to the human experience simply by virtue of their existence. Being inherent means that our worth is not something that we have to work to earn, and it's not something that we have only because a deity bestows it on us, even though we don't really deserve it. I want to quote Jim Palmer, not the pitcher, a former Christian minister turned Nashville-based humanist spiritual teacher. One of the greatest crimes against humanity is religion's teaching that being human is a condition to overcome, a disease to be cured, a sin to be forgiven for, and an evil to be saved from. I want to thank Reverend Doug Traversa for bringing that quote to my attention by way of a Facebook post. To have dignity basically means to deserve to be treated with respect. So we are asserting that because all people have inherent worth, we should honor that by treating each other with respect. The first principle is about overcoming our natural tendency to divide people into groups and to prejudge them based on our views of those groups. It's about recognizing the worth and dignity of the disempowered, the disenfranchised, the marginalized, the hungry, the sick, the poor, victims of oppression and repression. It's about treating people as individuals rather than as part of an undifferentiated mass, which begins with seeing them that way. There's roughly 8 billion people on this planet, and we need to remind ourselves that each and every one of them is just as richly complex and unique as you or I. Yes, even those we might label as bad people have inherent worth and dignity. This discussion seems to always go to Hitler, and I'm not going there. That emphatically does not justify evil acts. Indeed, what is almost the definition of an evil action is one that lacks respect for the inherent worth and dignity of others. To do good is to have that respect and to practice the compassion that it engenders. One final thought before moving on to the second principle. Please always remember that every person includes yourself. That supporting our first principle includes acknowledging your own inherent worth and dignity. Our second principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. I see it as a natural extension of the first principle. Having declared that all persons have inherent worth and dignity, here's how we should treat each other. As for dissecting the wording, I'll leave the in human relations alone as being fairly self-evident and focus on the justice, equity, and compassion part. Because it's easier, I'll start with the definition of equity. Not that much easier. In the context of our principles, the simple definition is fairness or impartiality. A longer synonym is equitableness. An equitable system or society is one in which everybody is treated fairly, without bias, prejudice, or discrimination. As is often noted, equitable is not the same as equal. We all have different challenges and obstacles, and what is required to treat one person fairly may be different from what's required for another. Justice is actually a bit harder concept to pin down. The dictionary definitions make justice sound like a synonym for equity, perhaps in more of a legalistic sense. But I think the way we use it is in the sense of corrective or restorative action. That is, justice is the correction of past injustice or of existing inequities. So I think of equity as the desired state of human affairs, and justice as the action needed to get from here to there, or in some cases back to there. The details of what constitutes equity or justice in a society and in its legal system are obviously going to be a matter of widely varying opinion. Life's complicated. Compassion is a very similar word to empathy. Empathy is from a Greek root meaning to feel or suffer along with, while compassion is from a Latin root meaning essentially the same thing. But there's an important difference in the English definitions. Empathy is basically imagining oneself in another's place, or in the fuller dictionary.com definition, the psychological identification with or vicarious experiencing of the feelings, thoughts, or attitudes of another. Also, from dictionary.com, compassion basically means empathy with someone stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. In other words, empathy can be relatively neutral, but compassion implies the urge to do something about it. I do feel that empathy is a necessary precursor to true compassion. I think it's important to constantly and consciously try to see things from another person's viewpoint, to at least try to understand their experience instead of interpreting it through the filters of our own experience. The way I think these concepts fit together is that compassion is what gives us the desire to see justice done, even when we are not the direct victims of the injustice, to establish or reestablish equity in human relations. Our third principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. The wording of the principle is a little ambiguous, but I'm going to assume that the phrase "in our congregations" was meant to apply to both encouragement to spiritual growth and to acceptance of one another. Otherwise, those would be two pretty much unrelated concepts that really don't go together as a single principle. So my interpretation is that the first and second principles are about the respect we should accord to all people, while the third principle was intended to be about how UUs should be in community with each other. There is such a wide variation in definitions and usage that tolerance and acceptance are often used almost as synonyms. Here's the definition of tolerance from dictionary.com that I think actually connotes acceptance in the way we usually think about it. A fair, objective, and permissive attitude toward those whose opinions, beliefs, practices, racial or ethnic origins, etc., differ from one's own. Freedom from bigotry. I would note that the etc. covers a lot of ground here. There's a mistaken notion held by a lot of non-UUs and even some UUs that because we don't have a creed and we encourage freedom of thought, that UUs can believe anything we want. My issue with this notion is summarized in the paradox of tolerance as described by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. To unwind the paradox a bit, it's not really a paradox to say that we are tolerant of everything but intolerance, because it's really a semantic issue. We're not using tolerance and intolerance as direct opposites here. The tolerance that we espouse is not tolerance of all beliefs or ideas, but acceptance of and respect for people without regard for their race, ethnicity, national origin, age, gender, sexual orientation, or any of the other categories used to divide us. And what we are intolerant of is not people, but beliefs or ideas that are not compatible with our principles. No, as UUs, we can't believe anything we want, and no, we don't have to accept all viewpoints as valid. There are many spiritual paths and belief systems that are compatible with the UU principles, maybe as many as there are UUs, but importantly, that's not the same as saying that all paths or beliefs are valid. To talk about encouragement to spiritual growth, we have to first decide what we mean by spiritual growth, and to do that, we have to decide what we mean by spirituality. I'm going to use the very general definition that spirituality is a sense of connection to a larger whole. It doesn't require a religious or supernatural belief, but it certainly encompasses those. In that view, then, spiritual growth is a process of discovering and deepening your sense of connectedness to humanity, to the earth, to the universe, to a metaphysical or transcendental reality, to something outside yourself, by whatever path works for you. It need not be tied to a particular religious or supernatural belief, or to any religious or supernatural belief at all. It's possible to develop a deep appreciation of your place in the interdependent web of our seventh principle from a completely secular perspective. With this view of spirituality as connectedness, beliefs or paths that are antithetical to spiritual growth would be those that tend to divide us from each other, thus conflicting with our sixth principle, or that separate us from the larger reality, thus conflicting with our seventh principle. Which brings me back around to my earlier assertion that what the third principle is about is how we as UUs are to be in community with each other. We're called to accept each other as the beautiful individuals we are, and to encourage and support each other in our individual spiritual journeys. The fourth principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. The novel notion of a faith that not only tolerates questioning but actively encourages it is what attracted me to Unitarian Universalism in the first place, and why it became my spiritual identity. I've always been an insatiably curious seeker of truth, so much so that my self-image and my sense of identity are inextricably bound up in it. As for parsing out the wording, let's start with truth. I didn't say I was going to go in order. In this context, truth would commonly be understood to refer to metaphysical, theological, and/or philosophical truth, or in a broader sense, the way things really are, and the resulting, this is how I, and perhaps other people, should be in the world. Meaning here, I think, connotes importance or significance in a larger context than day-to-day life. Now, to me, meaning is not something you find in a book, under a rock, wherever, but something you create. I find that notion far more awesome and inspiring than meaning being something that's imposed on us. So I'm sticking to it, but I will allow that you might have to search for the best way to create meaning. Free here means unconstrained. Many religious leaders would get quite nervous about their followers exploring too widely. Our religious texts, teachings, or traditions, they might say, contain all the truth and meaning you could ever need, and by looking elsewhere, you risk being led astray, which, depending on the particular religion, could put your eternal soul in peril. Even a more liberal faith might encourage seeking outside the faith for knowledge, but truth and meaning? Why? We have all the truth and meaning you could ever need right here. As for me, I'll look almost anywhere for insight into truth, and I'd encourage you to do the same. Responsible, to me, is a very important word in this principle, means that it is incumbent on us not to accept anything blindly. A large part of that is being honest with ourselves. Are we attracted to a belief because it fits with our experience, and to the best of our ability to discern it makes sense? Or are we ignoring warning flags because it appeals to a baser instinct and makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside? I'm in full agreement with the notion that there are many paths to the spiritual mountaintop, and that we can switch paths or carve a new one even, and that we can help each other along even if our paths are not exactly the same. But we have to maintain a healthy skepticism to protect ourselves from misguided beliefs. There are toxic beliefs and worldviews that can lead us astray, and we have to remain vigilant against them. In that spirit, I'd encourage you to review reading number 657 in your hymnal, It Matters What We Believe, by Sophia Lyon-Foss. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read it, but you may want to look it up. That leaves search. It's not lost on me that the principle doesn't promise that we'll find truth and meaning. UUs are, by and large, a community of seekers, always looking for new knowledge, new insight. It's the spirit of searching that is perhaps more important than the finding. To question is indeed the answer. I think of my search for truth as like walking toward the North Star. I can stay on that pilgrimage all my life without getting appreciably closer than when I started, but at least I know I'm always headed north. The search for truth keeps me oriented and gives my life purpose and meaning. I know that I'll never figure it all out, and I really don't know how I'd handle it if I did. I suppose I'd have to start a religion or something. The fifth principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in our congregations and in society at large. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process can almost be viewed as two separate principles, so I'm going to talk about them separately. The right of conscience is the right to hold your own moral code and belief system and to live according to those beliefs. By extension, that includes the right not to have religious or moral beliefs or practices forced on you. By further extension, of course, it also includes your responsibility not to force your beliefs or practices on others. In other words, if exercising your right of conscience requires you to do things that are injurious to others, to live in such a way as to violate my right of conscience or my civil rights in general, then we have a problem. I believe that the right of conscience follows directly from the fourth principle, but the limitations of that right lie in that word responsible, and in the realization that your right of conscience doesn't come at the expense of everyone else's. With that, I'm going to move on to the second half of the fifth principle, the use of the democratic process. In reading number 594 in our hymnal, the fifth principle is restated simply as, we believe that all people should have a voice and a vote about the things which concern them. Democracy is complicated and very messy in practice, but ultimately it's a simple concept. Decisions affecting a group of people should be made by those people, not imposed from above, and each voting member of the group should have an equal voice in those decisions, even if it's an indirect voice by way of elected representatives. The Wikipedia article on democracy includes political scientist and Stanford professor Larry Diamond's view that democracy consists of four key elements: a political system for choosing and replacing the government through free and fair elections, the active participation of the people as citizens in politics and civic life, protection of the human rights of all citizens, and a rule of law in which the laws and procedures apply equally to all citizens. I'll add my own observation that freedom of speech, the voice we are all entitled to, a free press, and a strong public education system are critically important to the success of a democracy, which depends on the participation of an informed citizenry. The roots of our affirmation of the democratic process are in our first and second principles, that every one of us has inherent worth and dignity and thus deserves a seat at the table, and that our civic affairs should be conducted with justice, equity, and compassion, which is at least the goal of the rule of law. As for the use of the democratic process in our congregations, we walk our talk. Not just our individual congregations, but our UU association are governed by democratic processes. I've seen that up close and personal. It's messy, but it gets the job done. Our governance is a lot more bottom-up than top-down, even if it doesn't seem that way from the point of view of a small congregation sometimes. As self-governing communities in covenantal relationship with each other and with the UUA, our congregations are what we make them, which is both an opportunity and a responsibility. Our sixth principle, that we affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, is a natural consequence of our other principles, particularly the first, affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all persons, and the second, calling for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. The phrase liberty and justice for all is of course also found in the Pledge of Allegiance, but I think of the sixth principle as a reminder that our principles and our compassion don't stop at the U.S. border or any other national border. I've come up with my own admittedly long description of the world community we strive for. A feeling of human kinship that transcends national borders as well as racial, ethnic, cultural, and religious boundaries, and the mechanisms by which we encourage, promote, and actualize that. To put it another way, it's a recognition and celebration of the things we have in common instead of the things that divide us. Peace is more than just the absence of war or violence. It's also the absence of the threat of war or violence. It really comes down to a state of mind. It's a commitment to a process and a philosophy of resolving differences by nonviolent means. A state of order that's maintained by oppression or brutal repression is not peace. On an international level, there can be no real peace without world community. Liberty and justice for all, like I said, those are part of the Pledge of Allegiance. But what do those nice sounding words, liberty and justice, actually mean? Liberty, I would submit, is the individual freedom to pursue one's own path in life as one wishes, insofar as it doesn't infringe on the rights and liberty of others. There's that pesky responsibility thing again. Justice is the process by which we endeavor to right wrongs, to sort things out when people do infringe on the rights of others. As there are many, many wrongs in the world that need to be righted, it's perhaps appropriate that the word justice shows up in two of our principles. The for all part, that's just our first principle. Again, I subscribe to the notion that any rights you are not willing to accord to others, you don't deserve for yourself. Note that what we affirm and promote is the goal of world community. That wording is an acknowledgement that we aren't there yet. That peaceful world community is a long-term aspiration. Indeed, that will never make the world perfect, but that we need to keep striving to make it better. I do think ultimately some form of world government, or at least much closer cooperation between nations, will be necessary for our long-term survival. For one thing, it's the only way to lasting peace. For another, as the world gets more crowded, there are so many problems that transcend borders and can't be solved without cooperation. Air and water pollution, climate change, depletion of resources, to name a few. What form that might take, the path from here to there, how long it might take to get there, I have no idea. It's not a short-term possibility. Now, the first 6 principles relate primarily to human society, interpersonal relations, and personal growth. The 7th principle, that we covenant to affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, is the only one that goes beyond that to recognize that we humans are part of something bigger. Accordingly, the 7th principle can be understood to cover environmental issues, conservation, and ecology. In that sense, it encourages us to work to preserve Earth's ecosystem. But in a wider sense, it also reminds us that we are an integral part of our planet and of our universe. Respect in this context, I think, connotes recognition and appreciation. It's not a matter of faith. The interdependence is there. If you look deeply, you can't help but see it. So to me, respect here means a commitment to engage in the deep looking. If we begin to truly appreciate how interconnected the universe is, respect goes beyond just acknowledgement to awe, to a profound reverence for the intricate and beautiful complexity of reality. Now, the interdependent web. As I've grown older and arguably wiser, I've developed a deeper and deeper appreciation for interdependence, for the visible and invisible tendrils that comprise the web, linking everything to everything, on and on through time and space, all the way back to the Big Bang. As Carl Sagan put it rather succinctly, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. This growing appreciation has been the result of a combination of things: meditation practice, Buddhist teachings, observation, and objective study of how the universe works. From a Buddhist viewpoint, everything is connected to everything else. Nothing, including the self, has a separate, independent existence. Thich Nhat Hanh referred to this state of affairs as interbeing. Now we move on to of all existence. This is a reminder that interdependence applies to the entire universe, not just, say, the ecosystem of our little planet. Even our local ecosystem has to be interpreted as including that huge fusion reactor we call the sun, and without which spaceship Earth would just be a cold, dead rock. So even when considering life on Earth, we have to extend our radius of interdependence at least to include our solar system. Finally, the phrase of which we are a part. It may sound like a bit of an afterthought, but the realization that each of us is an integral part of the interdependent web, not apart from it, not outside observers or alien invaders, is profound. This reality is our home. It's where we came from, and it's where we belong. So what role should we play in the web? I have a 2-part answer. First, from the point of view of the universe as a whole, to me, it's absolutely breathtakingly magical that 14 billion years or so after the universe sprang into being, things have arranged themselves so that some little piece of that universe should develop conscious life that endeavors to understand and appreciate the very universe that brought it forth. In that sense, we are the eyes and ears, the consciousness of the universe. There's a line that's reused or paraphrased so frequently that I can't find the original author. We are the universe becoming aware of itself. And second, from the point of view of the planet we call home, if we can dispel the illusion of separateness and start to recognize that this is our home, perhaps we can start to view our role here as one of stewardship rather than one of dominion and exploitation. That is, our goal should not be to heroically conquer our environment or greedily exploit it, but to interact with it sustainably and take care of it as if this were the only planet we had. Obviously, if we make it impossible for human life to continue on this planet, the first 6 principles won't really matter. So just to wrap this up, I was originally drawn to Unitarian Universalism by the 4th principle, but the longer I stayed, and also, of course, by having a first wife who'd been a lifelong UU, that had a little something to do with it. But the longer I stayed and the more I grew spiritually, the more I came to appreciate the importance of the principles as a complete set. I hope to inspire you all to ruminate a little more deeply on what those principles mean to you, how you interpret them, and the role they play in your life. I'm not overly concerned about the impending replacement of the principles in Article 2. I trust that whatever form the new version takes, it'll be substantially the same in spirit, and maybe give me an excuse to write a whole new set of sermons. So I'll close with this. Life's hard. Please help each other through it. Try to help each other make sense of it, and strive to leave the world a little better than you found it. And as always, thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I think that's what drew me to the UU church was the openness, and this church especially was the friendliness, and that, you know, I was free to explore and nobody would look down, because you in this area it's like, where do you go to church?
Can we introduce the visitors?
Oh yes, we want to introduce our visitors. They came from Montego. Annie, you want to introduce them?
This is Ann and Greg McNair, and we were in college together, and now they have moved back to the mountain, and I've been here about a year, and
It's wonderful to have you.
thank you.
Nice to be here.
Let's ask them. Okay. Let's see. We will do our hymn 414, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back in about 5-10 minutes after 11.
Okay.
5 minutes after 11 that should give us 10 minutes. So if you will stand as you are able, we will do our closing hymn, which is 414. Real short hymn.
As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we earn light our hearts till we return.
May you all go in peace, and thank you for having me. Lead the service today. I appreciate it.